Good evening and welcome to this in-person meeting of the Melrose School Committee. The date is August 24th, 2021, and the time is approximately 7 p.m. My name is Jen McAndrew. I'm the chair of the school committee, and this meeting is being broadcast and it is being recorded with our thanks to our friends at MMTV. For purposes of taking attendance, Ms. Hogan, will you please call the roll?
Here.
Mia Broda.
Here.
Ms. Driscoll.
Here.
Mr. O'Connell.
Here.
Ms. Rosie Thomas.
Here.
Mr. Selm.
Here.
And Ms. McAndrew.
Here, and with a quorum in attendance, we are ready to proceed. Let's start with the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under
under
God,
God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. And before we start, let me just remind the committee and members of the public and any guests from the administration we have tonight to please speak into the microphones very deliberately this evening. This is not just so that we can be heard in the chamber, it's actually an accessibility issue so that folks at home can hear us. And with the masks, it's very important that we speak into the microphone. So thank you in advance for doing that. Let me just unmute our remote friends. Next is the public comment portion of our meeting. This is the part of the meeting where the public may comment on matters before the committee for up to 3 minutes each. As we transition back here to in-person meetings, we are doing both remote public comment and in-person. And to those who requested a remote public comment in advance, they will be with us that way, and we'll go back and forth as needed. All comments in person or remote should be limited to opinions and issues within the school committee's authority, and speakers shall limit their remarks to matters on the agenda for tonight's meeting. Let me also say before we begin that we have received many comments from the public via email this week and last week. By my account, we've received more than 50 so far, and the committee has closely read and considered your views, and we thank everyone for sharing those views with us via email. And so without objection, the public comment period is open. Would anyone in person like to speak? And if so, please sign up at this time. Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. O'Connell. You can. I'll start actually by reading a public comment from a member of the public who is not able to connect remotely, and specifically ask that this be read into the record as a public comment. My name is Maureen Strode, and I am the parent of 2 elementary-age Melrose students. I simply want to publicly express my gratitude to the Melrose School Committee, superintendent, and school principals in putting together this plan and quickly following up with additional details as the community asked for them. The universal masking requirement and mandatory adult vaccination points demonstrate your commitment to the safety of our young learners, and your responsiveness to questions and feedback provides further reassurance to families like ours. Thank you so much. We do have 5 members of the public who asked to speak remotely, and let me start. Okay, to our friends who are here remotely, I'm going to start with Taylor. Taylor, I'm going to unmute you. Taylor, and if you could state your name, please, and go ahead for 3 minutes. Taylor? Okay.
Hi, did that work? I just changed my microphone.
Taylor, you can go ahead.
Hi, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Go for it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Just had a microphone issue. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for working so hard and being incredibly responsive to all of the many questions that have been coming in from parents and the public. We really appreciate that. It's quite impressive. I have one comment on the plan policy for pooled testing. And that is that I'd like to hear more from the committee about the reasoning behind making it an opt-in program rather than a program in which families have to opt out. Or in other words, I think the default should be that they are opted in. And one of the reasons that's been given is related to the right of children to receive a free, appropriate public education, which of course is something that's important. And the reasoning is that the opt-out approach would create barriers for students, resulting in negative unintended consequences. And I understand the part of the reason behind that, but I guess I'm not sure how a requirement to test would deny students a free, appropriate public education. In fact, I think that opt-out testing would help more students to get a free, appropriate public education by potentially not getting sick and not having to leave school. There are other communities that are doing opt-out testing, like the city of Somerville, for example, and I recognize that they've been working with their Department of Public Health to make that possible, but I'd like to hear more about why we are not able to do that. And that is the main comment that I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taylor. Next up, we have Kelly Vrooman. Kelly, I'm going to unmute you. You can go ahead for 3 minutes, Kelly. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to make this like really short and sweet because I am at work. But I just wanted to comment on the special education and the access services that you're going to cover tonight. Special ed is kind of like an umbrella. You move it or take it away and people get wet or it doesn't cover everybody. If you take away or cut any part of the access service department, it impacts all of the special education department. Kids will be dispersed throughout the department. Teachers will be overwhelmed and be overworked, and they'll be really trying to meet the needs of all their children in the class. As a parent of a child who receives services through the special education department, I feel as I'm constantly advocating for my child. So anytime I hear that there's going to be budget cuts to the special education department, even if it's not in the services that she might particularly need, it makes me have a pit in my stomach. And I feel like I constantly have to fight for her. And other children might be okay and they'll be fine moving on without these services. But she really needs services for reading. So I was unable to speak at the last meeting, but I sent a letter to the whole school committee and the superintendent. I voiced my concerns and I really poured my heart out in that letter. Unfortunately, I got another automated response from the superintendent, and I only heard back from one school committee member. I know it's really hard right now with everyone going back to school and COVID and everything. Believe me, I get it. We're all tired. But I have to say a special thanks to Jen Razzie Thomas because she reached out to me as soon as she got my email. She really helped me and to try to make bridges with different parts of special ed that my daughter might need. But I must say that I feel like, we advocate so much and we appreciate everything that you guys do for us. Believe me, I'm so thankful. But sometimes it's just nice to hear a response that says, like, I hear you. Even if even if you can't do anything in that moment, it's nice to just hear or feel that I'm heard. So I know that not everyone has a child with dyslexia or special education services, but it's nice to just know that you guys hear us and are trying your hardest to help us out. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Up next is Eric Wildman. Eric, I'm going to unmute you, and Eric, you may go ahead for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair McAndrew and the school committee and Superintendent Kuchenberger. I'm going to be incredibly brief. I just wanted to share my thanks to you, the superintendent and the administrative team, for the back-to-school plan that we received, including the decision that for masking for all staff and students. I know it's a contentious issue. It's an unfortunately contentious issue, and I think hopefully, although very late in the game, the decision by the Board of Education and Commissioner Riley to have the authority to do so at the state level will mitigate some of the city by city, town by town angst that boards of health and school committee has been faced and thrust into as we are in the 18th month of this pandemic. So I appreciate the forethought and the plan put forward. I think it's going to be a bumpy ride. I hope it goes well. I think it's important for people to realize that we have to use every tool in our toolbox when it comes to unvaccinated students, potentially unvaccinated other adults that might be in the building. There is no remote option. There is no, if kids get sick, they go home, they miss school. So every tool that we have in the toolbox, and I know it's disputed and debated, the efficacy of masks, but if it even helps one kid spend one more day in school during the course of the year, I think that's a key thing to keep in mind. So I appreciate the efforts that have been forward. I appreciate the follow-up email because today that came from the superintendent relative to school lunches. I think that's a tough one. I don't envy the position that the superintendent and the building administrators are in to make that work. I think it's going to be a challenge for middle school, high school, and elementary schools all around. So, I appreciate the plan. I wanted to share my voice tonight. I know people have emailed. I couldn't get my act together to do that. So, thank you in advance of what I imagine will be another insanely crazy, hard, difficult year. And I hope we get off on the right foot and have very good luck. And I appreciate the efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That concludes the remote participation in terms of folks who have logged in here, as far as I can see. And that therefore concludes our public comment period. So without objection, public comment is now closed. Thank you all. Next up, we have the announcements of the superintendent of schools. One of those agenda items, we have a special guest, and Dr. Kuchenberger. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair McAndrew. I want to start before inviting our special guest to the table to thank our partners on the city side. A few weeks ago, we were able to have our annual safety summit that includes members from the police department, the fire department, DPW, all of our administrators, our custodians, myself and the assistant superintendents come together to review our safety plans, to make sure that we have all of our occupancy permits and inspections up to date, and also talk about some of the challenges that are facing us this year and how we'll collaborate and communicate with one another to make sure that our schools are as healthy and safe as possible. It was a great success, and I just, again, want to express my gratitude for the city partners that we have. It really does make a difference, especially as we lead into another challenging school year. Also this week, we've had a ton, well, not this week, this summer, we've had a ton of professional development. This week alone, I've had a chance to observe our new Educator Orientation. I obviously was a part of that. The mayor stopped by to say hi to our new educators, our new paraprofessionals, our new support staff. And so many members of our leadership team step up and lead this professional development. It really is fantastic to see so many people shining in different ways. And I would start to list them off. I know I will miss some, but these are the ones that I had a chance to observe just this week alone. So I want to just give a shout out to our teacher leaders and our administrators who are helping us make sure that we're onboarding our staff in a way that feels supportive and rewarding. So Josh Cristiano, Jess Patty, Brian Corrigan, Melanie Acevedo, Matt Manfredi, Jen Cherninsky, Venna Cruz, of course, Dr. Margaret Adams, Sue Jones, and many others, putting the work in to make sure that we have a great start. So thank you to all of those partners for getting us rolling. We'll talk more about back to school a little bit later. But right now, I would like to introduce a community partner, Judy Crocker, to come on up and talk with us about Safe Routes to Schools.
Good evening. Can you hear me? All right. So, good evening. Thank you to Ms. McAndrew and Dr. Kuchenberger and the school committee for having Safe Routes to School come and address you this evening. So, we have been working with, actually, I will back up just a minute. So the superintendent and Ms. McAndrew asked me to put a memo together, which is in your packet. So perhaps for the viewing audience, I'll just explain very briefly what the program is. So we are the Massachusetts Department of Transportation's Safe Routes to School program. It's a free, federally funded, public school, public charter, grades K through 8 program. And we work to increase walking and biking for students through a collaborative, community-based approach that bridges the gap between health and transportation. We have a public health foundation, which includes evaluation, engineering, education, encouragement, engagement, and equity. So we have been working with the Melrose Public Schools for some time. And also, I want to also please give a shout out to the Melrose Pedestrian Bike Advisory Committee, as well as Mass in Motion, and the various municipal departments which we've worked with to improve walking and biking infrastructure and circulation planning on school and proximal municipal property. So to date, we are partnered with all the schools within the program, and this happened between 2006 to 2012, so you've been with the program for quite a while. In 2020, a complete streets grant was awarded for the Hoover School Sidewalk Project. Some schools have been intermittently active with the following activities. We've had some pedestrian safety, we've had Flagship Day participation, and this is where we celebrate as a whole state and also sometimes internationally different events within the school year. For the middle school in the Hoover, we've actually done a parent travel survey, which tells us where the students live approximately with their cross streets and how they get to and from school. And we've also worked with arrival dismissal observations for the middle school, the Hoover, and the BB, even though the BB has yet to be incorporated into the Melrose family. Looking ahead. So we're here today because working with the Melrose Pedestrian Bike Advisory Committee, we've been discussing how to craft the Safe Routes to School elements into a 3-year strategic transportation plan. And so the hope is for the Melrose Public Schools to try to join this initiative. And that is just a summary of what was included in the packet. I would like to also add something that was not included on the memo, is that we have some new funding opportunities, which are hot off the press. We have a Signs and Lines program. This is regulatory signage and pavement markings. It's a reimbursement program. Melrose would be eligible because you need to have schools that have been active for at least 6 months. So you qualify for that. This is a program which is, it's a reimbursement program. It's pretty much, it's for $6,000 plus for reimbursement total, and MassDOT provides technical assistance to get things done, and this is completed within the school year. The application process is already open, and it closes on September 17th. It's a very short window for an application because it's a very straightforward process to try to put your hat in the ring, if you would. So the second one is that we have a major infrastructure grant opportunity coming in October. We actually have a webinar coming up, informational webinar, which I will share with you the particulars with that, explaining how to apply for that. It's a rather involved process. This is where the money is a little bit more substantial. It's about $300,000 to around $1 million. Typically, it does not happen within the school year versus the Signs and Lines program. It does take a few years, usually 3, 4, 5 years out is usually how this happens. But we're very excited because MassDOT is offering both of these this year. So that rolls out in October, and so again, I will share that with municipal departments and with the school committee. So what we have on the memo was just some suggested action items for this calendar year, as well as what we propose for the entire 3-year strategic plan, working with, again, the Ped Bike Committee, Mass in Motion, and Melrose Public Schools. Of particular interest to the school committee is adopting a wellness policy amendment. This is something that we've partnered with the MASC with. And basically, it's just to incorporate active transportation. All our kiddos have to get to and from school, and so it's just putting those resources and caveats into the policy above and beyond physical activity. And we have the amendments already penned, just to make it easier so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But that being said, they can be customized in any direction. Some school districts like to include 2 sentences about it, and some have written over a page. So it just depends on how your policy subcommittee and your policy in general you like to go to with that. And we're also most excited because in June, DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, approved our professional development for health and wellness curriculum for our pedestrian and bike safety. So this is something we've been trying to make as more sustainable and equitable model, in that instead of having a few schools raise their hand to volunteer to offer these services for their students, if we do it across the whole district, it's something that is more, you adopt the curriculum, understand the process and the lesson plans, and we go from there. So, life skills. And I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Oblinsky, because I don't need to inform him about this, because he's been a longtime advocate for safe routes to school. So, very nice to see you at the other end of the room.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Should we take
All right.
some questions now? Okay, great. Are there any questions for Ms. Crocker from the committee? I have, go ahead, John.
Just a
Mr.
comment.
Oblinsky.
I just endorse the program immensely. They do wonderful work. I've had them come to just about every school I've ever worked in to work with the kids themselves, to engage with the kids about pedestrian safety and just the use of crosswalks, the idea of, not walking across parking lots, very basic things that, we're always telling our kids, but are more reinforced when someone from a state agency is coming out and encouraging it. And, they do great work, and I'm excited to hear about the grants as well. And, I'm happy that we have them here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Obremski. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Ms. Rosie Thomas, please.
It's a great program to try to get kids moving and being independent and being healthy. And also, we're going to have to really continue to work on climate change and getting out of cars. And so this is another example of how to do that with young people. So thank you for the work. And I know, unfortunately, there's been 2 deaths on the North Shore of kids on bikes this summer. So it's really important to, get kids on bikes, but also teach them how to do it safely and create city space that allows for bikes to be roaming around safely too. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Seeing none, I have one just comment and question, if I could. Just want to point out that the other 2 action items for this year that we've talked with Ms. Crocker and her colleagues about are to do arrival and dismissal audits at the Lincoln and Roosevelt schools. I know we've all had some concerns and questions from the community and from the committee regarding some of the handicapped accessibility spaces at the Roosevelt School, for example, and some of the traffic in and out of the back lot of the Lincoln School. And I think that that will be really helpful information, so I just wanted to preview that for the community, and thank you. And the other is to develop walking route maps based on student location data. That's a partnership between the district, or will be, and Safe Routes to School, where we will provide de-identified address data for our students, no names or anything like that, to help develop walking maps based on where students live to different schools. And my question actually for for both of you is whether we could include the Franklin School in that. And maybe just to point out that the Franklin School has a very young population, so that's our preschool, pre-K, and there's several kindergartens there. And I know we've had some interest in this from the parents of the Franklin School, so I just wanted to point that out, that they're very interested in the walking routes, and that it would be keeping in mind that there'll be, very small children and strollers and all of that jazz. So those were my only questions. I'm glad to hear that the Franklin would be included as well. Great. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
The final item under the superintendent's report is the enrollment report. So you have before you our current enrollment numbers as of August 18th. I will tell you that these numbers are changing daily. We continue to work with families to address hardship appeals and waitlist appeals. And so just today I saw 5 or 6 new students being placed, so these numbers will shift a little, but it gives you a sense of what we're looking at, both total population per building, but also average class sizes. In kindergarten, we do break it down so you see the exact number of students in each class because we're monitoring our integrated kindergarten class sizes. We like to keep those at about 17 or 18 rather. And we have 2 integrated Ks at Franklin this year, kindergartens. We also have an integrated kindergarten at Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Winthrop. So when you see that one class size of 18, you know that that's an integrated kindergarten class. So far, we're up to 317 kindergartners, could be plus or minus 1 or 2 since the 18th. And then we also show you how many sections of each class we have, total enrollment in each grade, and then how many sections for the elementaries. So you can get a sense of where we are. Of course, we're not putting 0.6 or 0.5 or 0.3 children in a classroom. So again, based on student needs, the principals will balance those numbers. But we use this to help us determine where can we add more students, move more students based on requests and things like that. And as I've been working with families, along with Brittany Ferguson, who is our student and staff support person, you see her right at the front desk when you walk into central office. We're constantly trying to figure out how can we make that happy phone call and give another family good news that we're able to honor their request. And we always tell them, even when we're saying not at this time, it doesn't mean that we're done. We keep coming back to it and looking at it. She looks at it every day. Her and I sit down at least once a week to go over the numbers. So our enrollment is back up to around 3,913 students. One thing I will point out is if you look at our ECC numbers, in years past, the average enrollment was around 290, just preschoolers alone. We're at about 203 because we are still keeping those preschool classrooms on the smaller side this year to allow for distancing. They do eat snack and lunch in their classrooms. But as the year goes on, much like we did last year, we may be able to open up slots to folks that are on wait lists and bring in more families. Our goal is to service as many families as we can, as early as we can. You'll also notice that our middle school enrollment, this is the first year that we're having that class size of a close to 300 in middle school. So we're at 292 with our grade 6, and then each year after will be over 300, with the exception of our rising second or third graders. It's like 295. But every other class is on pace to be over 300. So that's where we are currently. Next month, I will bring to you not only our current enrollment, but a comparison to the demographic study so that you can see how is it bearing out based on what was predicted. And remember that our demographer is going to come back this fall after we kind of get settled and reassess our enrollment numbers. And that concludes my report for today.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the superintendent on the enrollment report? Ms. Razzie Thomas, please.
I'm just curious about how we're doing with staffing, because I know that's an issue in many districts, and, some teachers are still very nervous about coming back and all of that, so.
Yes, so staffing, we continue to work at it. We're hiring every day. At the same time, we are seeing some resignations, requests for leaves of absence, so we're navigating that on the daily basis. We're pretty well staffed with our paraprofessionals this year, I would say comparative to last year, but we do still have some vacancies, but much better, in a much better place, which was sort of a nice surprise. We are still looking for some specialists. We have a few extended leaves in the art department, so if you know any art teachers, we're also looking for some special educators at the secondary level. We still have some vacancies there. And then, of course, trying to staff early bird and ed stations and lunch coverage and all the things in between. So we continue to be recruiting heavily. It is a busy, busy time of year. And thank you for asking that question, because I do want to give a shout out to Diane Hogan and Donna Cajon and all the other folks in the business office who are really working well beyond their work day to try to onboard these staff in a timely way. And often getting packets right at like 3:50 in the afternoon, but doing their best job to make sure that we're processing them in a timely manner.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the enrollment? I just had one additional comment when I'm glad you mentioned that the demographer is going to update the study. I hope that, and I think that he will also look at the new census figures that came out, because I think that Melrose's growth, at least initially in the census numbers, is quite robust, and perhaps more so than what was imagined in the demography study the first time around. So really looking forward to seeing how this and that play into the projections going forward. Thank you for that. Next on our agenda is the consent agenda, which tonight includes the school committee regular meeting minutes from July 27th, 2021, policy BEDD, rules of order, donations memo, the personnel report, the monthly budget summary, and the warrants as follows. Warrant S22005 in the amount of $490,370.13. Warrant S22006 in the amount of $6,199.43. Warrant S22007 in the amount of $85,989.95. Debit card S22008 in the amount of $428. And school warrant 4 S22009 in the amount of $11,872.80. Are there any items that members of the committee would like to remove from the consent agenda? Ms. DeSalm.
I would like to remove the minutes of July 27th, 2021, please.
Thank you, and the minutes will go to announcement of the chair. Any other items? Seeing Ms. Driscoll?
Warrant S22005 in the amount of $490,370.13, please.
Warrant S22005 will go to finance and facilities. Thank you. Any other items? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the balance of the consent agenda tonight? Made by Mr. O'Connell, seconded by Ms. Rousey Thomas. All in favor? And that carries unanimously with one absent at this moment. Thank you all. Next up is the work of our subcommittees, and we start off tonight with educational programs and personnel with Mr. O'Connell and Mr. Obremski.
Fine.
Sorry. Sorry.
Good evening, folks. Good evening, Superintendent.
Hello, sir.
Educational programs and personnel. First up, 8th grade field hockey waiver request. I see that Mr. Fogarty is with us. If you want to step up, Mr. Fogarty. Anything to introduce this, Superintendent?
Nope, I'm going to turn it right over to Mr. Fogarty, who's going to give us a little background, history, and the request.
Thank you very much. Fall sports kicked off Monday. We have great enrollment, and unfortunately, we have 24 students signed up to play field hockey. 11 of them happen to be seniors. So if they graduate and we come back with 15 or so, it's going to be tough times for field hockey. So we're seeking a waiver to allow 8th graders to participate with our team this year. We've done it a few times. We try not to, but with the pandemic, we found that our enrollment this year is slightly down in most of our female sports. So we're seeking a waiver to help this program out.
Very good. Any comments or questions for Mr. Fogarty? Seeing none, this does require a vote. Is there a motion to approve the request of waiver made by Ms. McAndrew, seconded by Ms. DeSelm? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that passes with 6 in favor and 1 absent. Thank you, Mr. Fogarty, much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, under Educational Programs and Personnel, approval of district officers. There's a document in the packet listing the recommended officers. Superintendent, anything to say on this?
The only thing I would say is this is an annual process that you vote on each school year, the start of each school year. So we have listed for you in the packet our school resource officers, our attendance officers, our school nurses, school physician, who happens to be here with us tonight. So thank you, Dr. Wolf, for being here tonight. And our civil rights and harassment officer, Ms. Lindquist, who's also here tonight. So thank you both for being in attendance.
Any comments or questions from the committee in that regard? As you know, this does require a vote. Is there a motion to approve made by Ms. Driscoll, seconded by Ms. DeSelm? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that passes with 6 in favor and 1 absent. Let me take a moment on behalf of the committee to thank all of these people. As we look through this list, we see people who were integral to our return to instruction last year, and we can't thank them enough. The SROs, the administrators, our nurses, Dr. Wolf, as always, for his advice and counsel, and likewise Ms. Lindquist for her continuing advice and counsel. Thank you all very much. And we move on. Next up, under Educational Programs and Personnel, the Middle School Needs Assessment Update. This is a report. This is not on for a vote. Superintendent, please.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. I'm going to invite my colleague, Patty White-Lambright, our Assistant Superintendent of Pupil and Personnel Services, to join us at the podium. As you know, we have been discussing and analyzing the access program at the middle school in great detail for several months now. We did hire an outside consultant to come in and do a needs assessment, not only of that program, but of the social, emotional, and student support needs at the middle school in general. Patty White-Lambright tonight is going to talk with you a bit about the report and also our response to that. Patty?
Great, thank you. As the superintendent said, we engaged with SEAM Collaborative at the end of last school year and hired a consultant, Katie O'Donnell, who came in and met with staff, reviewed documents, met with administrators, and put together a report for us. So you have a full copy of the report and a memo that accompanies it. So we received the final report on August 17th, and I'll just highlight a couple of the major points for those who might be listening. So in thinking about what Ms. O'Donnell thought when she reviewed and observed and talked with people, the recommendation is for the physical structure to have 2 classrooms so that can support different types of kids, different types of instruction. So felt that 2 spaces also that support de-escalation and provide for some opportunities for kids to help center themselves. We also want to look at clear entrance and exit criteria for students in this program. We want to look for, the recommendation was for 2 staff members who were dual licensed in both special ed and or math and English. Also, that there should be clinical support clearly identified and connected to this program. In addition to the teachers and the school psychologist support, would be also a full-time paraprofessional. So those are really the big picture components of this needs assessment. In addition, there were a few other points that they looked at. One was a recommendation to conduct a separate needs assessment based on information gathered from the YRBS. Another recommendation was to institute SOS, the signs of suicide, at all 3 grade levels. So currently, we do not do that at all 3 grade levels. Also suggestions for staff to be trained in implementing trauma-informed practices, and also for us to look at a system of monitoring absenteeism in general at the middle school. So that, in a very brief summary, were the highlights of the needs assessment. So the important piece about doing a needs assessment is then to really take that information and what are we going to do with that? Okay, where does that help us go? How does that inform our practices? So when we got a preliminary report, as you can imagine in this time of year, really couldn't wait for a final report, so I did go ahead and advertise for those dual certified individuals. As you can maybe imagine, that is somewhat of a challenge to have both of those, but it's not unheard of, and certainly something that we strive for. And throughout our secondary level, we actually have a number of staff members who are both certified in a content area and in special education. So that is something we definitely want to look at. So at this point, we have an internal candidate that we have moved forward and has accepted that position, who is certified in special education and is working towards the certification in a content area. So that position is currently staffed. In addition to the one position, we looked at our current resources and we identified a position for an individual where they would do 0.6 focused on reading, and then those students may or may not be connected to the Access program, but then the 0.4 of that position would be designated towards the Access program to provide additional academic support. So the teaching staffing would be 1.4. In addition, we have identified a dedicated paraprofessional to that program. And we have some additional supports that weren't specified in the needs assessment, but seem to make sense, again, to utilize our resources to support this program. And that would be utilizing our BCBA to support this program. This would be utilizing our new position of the secondary SEL specialist to support this program. And I think that, so those would be all our staffing pieces. And then we're looking to schedule a weekly team time for staff members and middle school administrators to work on any of the additional recommendation, such as developing that entrance and exit criteria. So designated time to do this work. We do think that implementing SOS in grades 6 through 8 is a very good idea, so we will plan on doing that. And the attendance issue has already been identified as a focus for the middle school school improvement plan for next school year. There's a couple of other pieces that we want to have some further discussion, and that would be the, thinking about, although this was a middle school piece, thinking about the SOS at the high school. So further discussion at the high school about that. And We will continue this relationship with SEAM and utilize the consultant throughout the school year to continue to support and grow this program. So that's a summary. I'm open to any kind of questions.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. White-Lambright. Anything to add to that, Superintendent, at this time?
The only thing I would add is we're also going to be connecting designating a school psychologist with our existing staffing levels to be directly connected to the program. I wasn't sure if you said that, Patty.
Great.
And we have had some significant turnover in special education staff at the middle school, which has allowed us really to take a comprehensive look at the needs of our students and really make some strategic alignments based on the strengths and of existing staff and opportunities that some of those retirements or resignations pose.
Very good. Ms. Razzie Thomas, please.
So, just like every other industry, even though, we hate to think of schools as an industry, like the entire, Massachusetts economy is cooking and there's not enough people to hire. So, I'm glad that it sounds like you have a plan to start the year that's a reasonable plan, but there's a very clear recommendation in there about having 2 separate classrooms. So are you going to be able to do that?
So we have the space. Absolutely, we have 2 separate classrooms that are next to each other. But we do have that space identified, and we'll continue to use both spaces so that we have the full-time teacher, the full-time para connected, and would be able to utilize both of those spaces, and then any of the additional support staff. So we will have 2 classroom spaces.
So you have like a 1.4 instead of a 2.
Correct.
But other than that, you have the other support staff that are going to be able to provide supervision, social emotional support, and all that. Okay, great. Thank you. I want to thank both you and the superintendent for making this a really transparent process and deep and meaningful, and not just, there was, we all received a lot of emails. We talked with a lot of people. We felt the pressure. This was a really great move to get a consultant in. It's a really great way to get a clean set of eyes in a situation. And I want to thank both of you very much.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Ms. McAndrew, please.
Thank you. And I echo that thanks to both of you and to the consultants and everyone who participated in the process, the educators and the administrators. It's not easy to take a look at something that's, serving students and families and say, how can we do this differently or better? And I know that comes with a lot of pressure and emotion, and I'm really appreciative of the detail in the report and in the summary. I guess following up on Ms. Razzie Thomas's question, though, will you work towards 2.0 dual licensure educators? I mean, is that the plan? If we can, I understand what we're doing this year, sort of 1 educator and then the para and the additional supports, but will we work towards 2 full-time educators with dual licensure if we can?
So
I think that really will be dependent on student need. We're going to continue to assess. Right now, we have a need for that 0.6 reading specialist inside and outside of students connected to the Access program. So that's our first priority, is to get someone with that really targeted reading instruction training and practices, and then also being able to support the academic side of the Access program utilizing that same staff member. But if we see that our numbers prove that we need another dual certified staff member in that program, we certainly will advocate for that. And we do still have ESSER funding that we can use if it becomes emergent within this budget cycle.
Great. So I guess just one more question and one comment. Just, I guess, to put a really fine point on it, to people who are concerned that we are cutting services at the middle school, what is your reaction to that?
So we are, we certainly are not cutting this program. Okay, so we will continue to have that therapeutic component, a therapeutic program at the middle school to address students who have been identified as needing that level of support. We will be staffing that program in a little bit different way than specifically as recommended, but provide that level of support that students require. And I actually think we're providing a higher level around supporting the social emotional needs, in part due to the new position of the secondary SEL specialist.
Thank you. And just finally, I'm so glad to see that the recommendations and the commitment to looking at chronic absenteeism and school refusal, and I know that's a population that is sometimes served by the Access program. I think I'm just looking forward to hearing more about that going forward. Middle school is such a critical time where that challenge can show up, and so I'm thankful that that has so much focus in this plan. So thank you both.
Yeah,
Very
I think
good.
that will be interesting, particularly this year in returning to school in a more consistent manner. So that attendance piece, I think, will be very important data for us to be looking at.
Thank you.
Ms. Driscoll, then Mr. Obremski, please.
Thank you. I'm delighted to hear that you are not cutting special education services, but that you're reimagining special education services to serve our students even more strategically and with more refined services designed for them. So I think that's excellent. I also just want to speak to the high quality of the consultant you used. SEAM Collaborative is well-known throughout the state, I believe, for not only their high quality of service to students, but their professional development, their consulting services, their investment in children, their belief in high-quality education for all students. So I feel like the consultant that was chosen aligns with the mission of the Melrose Public Schools, and because of that, they could also use our strategic overview as a foundation for their report and ensuring that all of our students are served well, appropriately, and exceeding expectations to the best that we possibly can. So thank you for your partnership with them.
Yes, I would agree, and we look forward to continuing that work with them this year as an ongoing consultant to this program.
Mr. Obremski, please.
Thank you. First, thanks for bringing in the consultants. I think sometimes, especially in the area of education, it's hard to bring in an outside group to assess what's being done. There's always this fear of, they're going to come back with these recommendations that we're not going to be able to implement and stuff. And I always like to give the analogy of like the Christmas lights that you've left up on the house. And after a while, you don't even notice them after a few months. And then your neighbor says, on the 4th of July, your Christmas lights are still up. And you're like, oh my goodness. And it's sort of like bringing in consultants. They start telling you to do things differently, which isn't always a bad thing. So to my question, is this, I know that we have the positions, are they currently staffed? Like, do we have people in these? I know that Ms. Razzie Thomas asked earlier that there are some positions that aren't filled yet. Are these currently filled positions?
So the 1.0 position is filled by that internal candidate. The 0.4, which is part of that 0.6 and 0.4, 1.0 position, that position is not filled at this moment. We are still actively looking. The superintendent just gave me a lead earlier today that I'll be following up on. So we are still pursuing that piece. And I'm working with the middle school administrators to kind of come up with a plan B of how we might look at other people's schedule and be able to provide that 0.4 coverage as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Selm, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. White-Lambright, thank you for this presentation, this report, and going forward, I echo my colleagues in that I am appreciative that we're not cutting services, but reimagining it. I wanted to ask specifically about SOS. You made mention of the report makes mention of the YRBS, the Youth Behavior Risk Survey. And I note our most recent one was 2019, and roughly a third of our students reported at that time either feeling sad or depressed, with a shocking 3% having attempted suicide. And so I am curious as to what benefits you feel will happen from SOS versus what was existing prior.
Sure. And so I just want to just clarify that information in the report is from 2021. So we just did do it in 2021. I don't recall actually what the 2019 looks like. But, you know, from my point of view, a 0.1% of students attempting suicide is too much. So, you know, I think implementing the SOS across all grade levels will serve as an additional screening support to identify students. I guess my concern when I look at those numbers is if students are reporting this as an attempt, doesn't mean we are even aware of that attempt, okay? So there are certain students that I am well aware of, okay? And we have addressed those students' needs. We work with families, outside agencies to have that level of support for kids. The SOS might help us to identify those students that I don't know in that 3%. Okay, so.
I guess I need to rephrase the question. How is SOS different or expanding on what we currently have in-house?
Yeah, so currently we don't do it at every grade level, all right? So we're only capturing a certain number of students at the middle school. So we were only doing it at 7th grade.
Okay.
So by expanding, we're going to expand our net to include a greater number of students, that this might provide us with the information to help us identify sooner any red flags for students before they attempt, so that we can provide them with additional support that they need. So that would be the purpose of expanding it to 6th and 8th grade.
So I agree, we absolutely need to expand it. That's not a concern. That is not a question by any stretch. It's merely a look to reassure parents that their child was well taken care of before and is going to continue to be well taken care of, if not more so, going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Rosie Thomas, you content?
Yeah, one quick thing is it's really common in programs like this, in all, across districts, to have difficulty being super clear with entry and exit. And that's another thing that they highlighted in the report. And I think, working on that is really important because, we want the least restrictive setting for all our students. We want just the right amount of support at the right time, and building trusting relationships and trying to do as much in the general education setting as possible. So I just wanted to say that is one of those things where, programs get set up and then it's hard to keep them going exactly as you should keep them going. And so it's always good to reboot a program. And so I'm excited to see where the program will be in a year from now. And we're going to miss you too, by the way.
I'll listen to that school committee when the update comes, because I too will be very interested to know where we are in a year from now.
Thank you.
Very good. Any closing thoughts in this regard, Superintendent?
No, I just want to thank Patty and her team for going through this process. Our educators, I think it was like the second to last day of school that they were sitting in on the interviews with the consultant, which is hard to have that level of focus, but it's a clear sign of their commitment to our students. And although we want this data to look differently, it's important that we're looking at data to understand what our students are telling us and what they're not telling us. So you'll see throughout this school year our focus on making sure that we're progress monitoring throughout the year, not just academically, but socially, emotionally, mentally, physically, is so essential to our back-to-school plan, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but I just want to thank Patty and all of our educators, the middle school educators who gave their time to make sure that we're solving the right problems.
Great. Yeah, I would agree with my colleagues. Very responsive to the concerns that were raised and appropriately comprehensive in response, so thank you for that. I would also add, clearly, this is something that we as a group care about. So I would ask both of you, when do you think it would be appropriate for this to come back before us for a check-in?
My hope would be a few months into the school year, we could have the educators connected with the program coming back and talking about their progress and what they've been able to implement, what's new, what's different. You know, some of the things that we're looking at is just even the physical environment, like how do we truly make it more therapeutic? And that'll be supported by the work with SEAM. So we'll definitely be reporting back, but want to give them a few months to get settled, to get to know their students first and foremost really deeply, and then get those routines in place. And then I'd like them to come and tell you about their success.
That would be terrific. I assume you agree with that, Ms. White-Lambert. Great. Thank you. And Chair McAndrew, I assume we can accommodate that in our schedule looking forward.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both. Thank you again, Ms. White-Lambert.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Next up, the marquee event of the evening, our back-to-school plans. Madam Superintendent.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you all about this and to speak publicly about our back-to-school plan. I'm extremely proud of not only the health and safety protocols that we've put in place, but also our approach to accelerating learning. And so I'll talk a little bit about these things generally. You've had the plan, so you've had a chance to read it. And of course, Dr. Wolf, our school physician, is here. He and I were able to talk a little bit last night, I think it was. And I certainly invite you, Dr. Wolf, at any time if you'd like to step up to the mic and add to what I'm sharing. So here we are again. We thought the school year was going to look much different this year. I feel like we had those 3 little teaser weeks in July where it felt like maybe we were on the other side of COVID, but that's not yet the case. And so it's very important that we continue to have a multi-pronged risk mitigation strategy in place in order to ensure that all of our students can fully access in-person learning. As you know, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has made it very clear that remote learning is not an option. Our students are not able to be virtually present and have that count as time on learning or attendance this school year. So that means we have to be willing to do whatever it takes to ensure that all students can have full access to in-person learning. So we are requiring universal masking whenever any adult, vaccinated or unvaccinated, any student, vaccinated or unvaccinated, is inside our school buildings. And you'll see throughout that I'm highlighting multiple times about well-fitting. We're 18 months into the pandemic. We all know that a mask is supposed to go over your nose and under your chin. And it's really important that we all find masks that we love and like to wear so that we can do that all of the time, not some of the time. And so we'll be reminding staff and students, volunteers, and visitors of that anytime they are inside our school buildings. We also know we've learned a lot about COVID. We're learning more about the Delta variant every day, but we know that when we're outside, transmission is much less likely. And so we are allowing mask breaks and students and staff to be unmasked when they're outdoors. We also want to encourage people to continue to stay home when you're sick or symptomatic. I add to that if you're feeling off, feeling weird, feeling strange. So many times this year, after talking with folks, after they've tested positive, they've been like, well, you know, I kind of felt weird on Tuesday, but I thought it was just I was tired. And so we want everyone to really listen to your bodies and make sure that if you're feeling off, strange, weird, sick, symptomatic, that you're staying home. That's going to be a really critical part to keeping all of our students in school. Also, frequent hand washing. I'll give one of many shout outs tonight to DPW for the installation, and I might get these numbers backwards, but we've added hand washing stations exterior from the bathrooms in our hallways where bubblers or water fountains, depending what part of the country you're from, used to be. And so students and staff can access that when walking through the halls at any time. We have hand sanitizer all over the place. We'll continue to do that. But I believe, Dr. Wolf and other medical professionals would say hand washing is always preferred when you can do that. We also have bottle fill stations, I think 15 or more bottle fill stations through some grants that our colleagues at DPW have obtained so that students are staying hydrated and staff are able to refill their water bottles at various points throughout each building. We're implementing 3 different types of testing this year. It's one consent, so our hope is that the streamlined consent, which will be a part of the back to school, things that parents are checking off, such as the acceptable use policy, acknowledging that they read the handbook. We'll be asking them to provide consent for COVID testing, and then also asking families to voluntarily share vaccination information with us. We do have state numbers that tells us what the vaccination rates are here in Melrose, but the more concrete data we have, the better, more informed decisions we are able to make when we think about our multi-pronged risk mitigation strategy. So the 3 types of testing, as you see in the plan, the first is symptomatic. That is designed for people who come to school feeling well and then in the middle of the day develop symptoms. Our school nurses will be able to administer the Bionex Now rapid antigen test. I took one last night myself because I have this kind of cold thing going on, so just to make sure before I came to school today, and obviously it was negative. It's quick, it's easy, it's painless, and you get the results in 15 minutes. So that will be available if folks are developing symptoms while they're at school. Don't come to school symptomatic. Only do come to school if you're feeling well. The second type is the test and stay, and this is a critical part to making sure that students have access to their instruction. So test and stay is designed for students who are identified as close contacts of a COVID positive person. And what this allows them to do, if they are asymptomatic, again, if you're symptomatic, you're staying home, but if you are asymptomatic, they can be tested for 7 consecutive days each day by the school nurse that they're in school. If day 6 or 7 happens on the weekend, we will still test them on the Monday when they come back to school to ensure that they remain negative while they're asymptomatic. Of course, if you're a close contact and at any time you become symptomatic, you need to get a PCR test to make sure that you're not positive. So if you're negative, you stay. If you're positive, obviously you begin isolation. And isolation is still a 10-day period, and that includes even isolating from people inside your home. So we have had experiences last year where there was 1 or 2 members in a household who were positive, and the other members were able to remain negative because families were isolating really well. So we have the symptomatic, we have the test and stay, and then we have what we're calling this year our routine COVID-19 safety checks, formerly known as pooled testing. This will be done by CIC Health staff who will come to our buildings Monday through Friday. We will have at different schools will be testing on different days. And the staff will come in, there will be an observer, there will be a specimen collector, and I forget the title of the other person that will be there. And we're working with CIC Health to do this so that we're able to keep our nurses available and free more throughout the day to do day-to-day nursing. We'll have all of our students back in the building. That'll be twice as many that they had in the building at most points throughout last year, so it's really important that we have the extra help. So we'll have an observer, a site lead, and at least 1, sometimes 2, depending on the size of the school, sample collectors. What's really great about this plan, last year we were doing Monday, Tuesday across the district. Now it's going to be spread across the 5 days. So on Monday, the CIC Health will start at the Winthrop School, and then they'll go to the Horace Mann in the mid-afternoon. So those 2 schools will be done on Monday. On Tuesday, they'll start at Hoover, and then they'll travel to Lincoln. So those 2 schools will be done on Tuesday. Wednesday and Thursday, we will have the middle school and high school. Those schools, just given the size, need to be spread over 2 days, or we're planning to do them over 2 days. We'll see how it goes. And then Friday will be Franklin and Roosevelt. And so if you think about it, just in this room, how many of you have children at multiple age levels? This really will give households multiple touch points because your kids won't all be getting tested on the same exact day. So if there is exposure, to me, I think that seems like it's going to increase the validity. Also, collecting the consent right away in the beginning. Last year, we were one of the first to do that, and it was confusing, and we asked families 3 times to provide consent. No wonder people were confused. Now, it'll be right in the beginning of the year, should be quick, seamless, and we're working to put that right into Aspen so that all of that information is one spot. You just click across your tabs when you go on to do your parent back-to-school paperwork, and you'll be good to go. The other thing that we are trying to do is maintain physical distance as much as possible. If you remember back in the spring, even when we went to 3 feet of physical distance, some of our schools were able to stay at 6 feet. So obviously we want to maintain distance when we can, so long as it doesn't compromise our instructional programming and our delivery of education. And so students will work in small groups at times in the day. Teachers will be pulling small groups to provide Tier 1 supports and interventions to all students. We're not going to refrain from doing those things because we know our kids need that, and we have other risk mitigation strategies in place. But when unmasked, when eating, when drinking, we're trying to maintain as much distance as possible. And that includes in the lunchroom. One of the lovely and charming things about cities is that we have these very old schools, but that also becomes a challenge for us because not all of them are designed with the same space. For example, multi-purpose rooms and gyms, art rooms, music rooms, those types of things. Some of our cafeterias do allow for doors to be open or windows to be open to allow additional airflow. Some do not. But when we can do that, we're going to continue to do that. Teachers are still being asked to keep their windows cracked so that they have that additional airflow to supplement our HVAC systems. And we have HEPA air filters in every room. So there's one here in the chamber you can see. We'll be adding 3 or 4 of those to each of the dining areas so that we're just enhancing that airflow. And those, if we turned that up to level 3, it would be pretty loud in here. I think it's on 2 right now. So they're adjustable and staff can do that. I know when I'm preparing to have a meeting with several people, I'll turn it up before folks come in the room, or I'll turn it up as soon as folks leave the room. And so we have that flexibility to adjust that. And then lastly, in terms of the multi-pronged risk mitigation strategy, we will be requiring that all employees, all staff that work in the school, and all folks that volunteer in the schools be fully vaccinated. If they're not fully vaccinated, they will have to participate in the weekly routine COVID safety checks. That's all right on site, completely free, and we'll be having that support from CIC Health. For some of our staff, some questions have come up for, say, city employees who are in the buildings, maybe one day here, one day there. We're working with the city side to work out protocols for that as well. But anyone who is an employee or who is volunteering in the schools must be fully vaccinated or participate in those routine safety checks. And then lastly, I'll just highlight our approach to academics this year. We are not having a do-over year. We are not redoing last year. And frankly, I don't agree with the frame that some have used to talk about learning loss when it comes to the pandemic and our kids. Our kids have gained so much. When we talk about 21st century skills and the things we look for, I look for in every single employee: flexibility, agility, empathy, compassion, clear and effective communicators, innovation, creativity, vision, resilience. These are the skills and attributes that we've been talking about growing in our students to help them become 21st century learners. And when I observe our students and I see the way they're responding to this pandemic, I see so much evidence of them not only striving toward those things, but reaching and exceeding that. So our students have learned a lot. They've gained a lot in this pandemic. And so we have to be really careful about our messaging so that they don't go into this school year feeling like they're at a deficit. It's our job as the educators to develop strategies that are going to allow us to accelerate learning. So we won't be remediating this year. We've done that for decades, And what we've learned now from the research is that that actually perpetuates the opportunity gap and the achievement gap that we've been trying to close for decades now. So what's the difference between remediation and acceleration? Two simple ways to think about it. Remediation often focuses on drilling students with isolated skills, slowing down the curriculum, giving them lower level than their age-appropriate curriculum, and often ends up, especially for our historically marginalized populations, like I said, perpetuating that gap. When we talk about acceleration, we're talking about strategically preparing students for success in their current grade level content. And it's our job as the adults to deliver that strong grade appropriate instruction while then providing the just-in-time scaffolds and supports. So when we say acceleration, we're not doing more faster. That's not what we mean. We're really talking about that access to grade appropriate strong instruction with just-in-time supports. And so our 4 key priorities this year in Melrose is to continue our focus on equity and inclusion, making sure that all students feel safe and supported in our schools so that they can access that grade appropriate strong instruction. And that starts with our second priority, which is developing that deep sense of belonging. And so what that means for us is that we have to truly know our students in order for that to occur. Not just who they are as students and learners, but who they are as people, what their passions are, what their worries are, what their family support is like, who they are as people. So that's our second priority. Then we have to have really good systems to monitor their progress. We talked about it in the context of the Access program, but that's true for all of our learners. We have to be asking ourselves 2 questions about every student, every day, in every class. What does Julie know well? What is she ready to learn? How do I know? Those are the things that we have to keep asking ourselves about every student every day. And then giving them, lastly, the 4th priority, that strong grade appropriate instruction with the just-in-time supports. So they're not redoing last year. They're not behind. We need to adapt and adjust in order to help them accelerate their learning. So those are our key priorities from an academic lens. Of course, the risk mitigation is essential. If kids aren't healthy, they can't come to school. If staff aren't healthy, they can't teach children. So they really go hand in hand, and we can't have one without the other. So that's just general highlights of the plan. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk more specifically
Very
about
good.
any aspect.
Very good. Well done. Clearly, this is operational and administrative, but just as clearly very broad in scope and with significant policy implications across the board. So we will be exercising our authority and responsibility in voting on this tonight. With that in mind, for purposes of discussion, is there a motion to approve? Made by Ms. Razzie Thomas, seconded by Ms. DeSalm. Discussion. Mr. Obremski, please.
First, thank you for the overview on acceleration versus remediation. I think that's extremely important. I'm glad we're looking at acceleration versus remediation. And then I have a couple of questions revolving around testing in the event of a close contact. So if a child is a close contact in school, and then they, on a Wednesday, they can get tested on Thursday, and they can come to school, correct?
If a child's a close contact on a Wednesday, they still come to school the next day, and we'll test them with the Bionex Now first thing.
Right.
Yep.
And then, so then they come Friday, they get tested again. But let's say on Saturday, if they have a sporting event that they want to participate in, can they participate in the sporting event, or do we have to have them tested in order to participate in the sporting event?
So if they're asymptomatic,
Right.
and you've had negative tests, I mean, the ideal would be that you would test them again at home, which you can buy over-the-counter tests.
And we can
but
accept that.
There's no requirement from the school side to say that they're quarantined in that
So they can
aspect.
play.
As far as my understanding is, yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's
Ms. McCann, I'm sorry, Ms. Driscoll, please.
Thank you. I'm particularly appreciative of, as Mr. Obremski noted, the acceleration versus the remediation. And I would encourage anybody who is interested in learning more about that to read the acceleration roadmap published by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I found that a very accessible document, very positive. And just two things about the concept, which I think is new to those of us who attended school and then had children who now or have recently gone through the schools. One is sort of shifting the foundation of the learning from the responsibility of or abilities of the student to the requirement and the expectation that staff own the responsibility for exploring and finding the ways that the student will learn personalized learning using grade appropriate or age appropriate materials and supports that speak directly to the student. So that, to me, that whole dynamic has shifted 180 degrees to the universal expectation that every student can learn and will learn. It's unlocking the door. It's finding the right key. And I think that is a dramatic change in education over a period of years, and one that is long overdue and very welcome. The other thing I just want to commend the district on is the depth and breadth of the diversity, equity, and inclusion training, because I think it provides personal filter into exploring an educator's own implicit biases, trying to remove those, whereas back in the day, I like to think it has greatly improved, but that there were judgments made about who can learn, who is able to learn based on a wide variety of things that have nothing to do with an ability to learn. Every child can learn. So I just want to thank you for the kinds of training that you're doing around that, to just remind ourselves as a community, a school community and a community at large, that every student is very able to learn. It's our job as adults to find the right key.
100% well said.
Ms. McAndrew, please.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this detailed plan, for your summary tonight, and also, I imagine many folks contributed to developing this plan, and I just want to thank everyone, principals, educators, our school physician, our school nurses. It's very comprehensive and helpful, and also at the same time accessible and easy to read. I do have a couple of quick questions. One is also around the close contacts issue. So if students, even if they're unvaccinated, are masked and 3 feet apart, they are not close contacts at all. They're not considered close contacts, right?
If they're in school or on a school bus. However,
They're in school or on a school bus, right?
The close contact definition the CDC has not changed the close contact definition. However, in the context of school, it does make a mention to if you're 3 feet or greater, then you may not be deemed a close contact.
And masked.
And masked.
Right. So in school. So there could be other close contacts out of school, and probably likely would be, or if the student was within 3 feet or unmasked, lunch or what have you, right?
And if you're deemed a close contact out of school, you may be ordered by the Department of Health to quarantine. That's the two separate settings, totally different quarantine rules, which is highly confusing. There's actually like 8 protocols.
Yes.
If and when there's a close contact, so.
I think that's great. So in terms of the contact tracing then, is there going to be 2 sets of contact tracing? So you're sort of in-school close contacts, if any, managed by the nurse, and then outside school contacts managed by the Board of Health?
So for us in Melrose, we're very fortunate because our nurses are city employees, and last year our nurses were contact tracers. And in fact, when cases came through the Melrose Health Department, our nurses, like any school-age child, was flagged for our nurses to do the contact tracing. This year, we're going to see how it goes. We have an interim health director right now, and some new nurses that are on staff. I don't know exactly how all of the contact tracing is going to go, but it'll still be in partnership with our local health department.
So a student who has a sibling at home, for example, who is unvaccinated would be a close contact who is also in school, and then they would be subject to the testing and quarantine response protocol that you described.
Can you say that again? I only
If
heard
a student is positive in school but has a sibling at home who is a Melrose Public School student and is not vaccinated, that child would also be a close contact and would be then subject to the testing and quarantine protocols that you described.
So I think these are some of the things we're going to have to work out, because in that situation, they're a close contact in their home because they're siblings. I don't know that would follow the close contact in schools or on a school bus guidelines, because those are two different settings.
Right, no, that's what I'm asking. I didn't think it would, because they didn't have the contact in school. Okay. And so speaking of all of that, can you say anything about notification? So if there's a COVID case in the classroom, for example, and students are not close contacts, will the parents be notified that there's a COVID case in the classroom or no?
Yes, our plan is to follow the same communication protocols as we did last year. So anytime there was a positive case, multiple communications occurred. First and foremost, anyone who was a close contact was contacted and given, explicit instructions of what they needed to do. Then if you were in the class or classes of someone who was a known positive, we would tell you you're not a close contact, but there was a positive case, so then families could make their own decisions on what they needed to do. We also then sent communication to the whole school, either stating there was a student or a staff member who has tested positive. So again, everybody has a different level of risk tolerance, and we want to make sure that people have the information, although we have to be kind of vague about the details that we can share, so that folks can then make their own decisions.
Excellent. That's really helpful, because I think that will allay some folks' concerns that they may have or that they've expressed to us. Sort of related to that, I guess, one of the things I'm wondering is, as the superintendent, what kind of things are you going to be looking at and tracking? I know the data reporting requirements to the state have changed from last year, but what are you going to be looking at and tracking and talking with Dr. Wolf and sort of looking at and the school nurses over the course of the year to see how we're doing and whether we need to adjust this very thorough mitigation plan that you've put in place?
So what I said to the principals the other day was that, in same conversation with the nurses, is in the beginning, we're going to have to go back to September of last year, where every time there was a positive case, there was a conversation. What do we know about the situation? Do we know? Sometimes we would know where the person was exposed. Sometimes we wouldn't. Obviously, close contacts, that's part of the conversation. What other activities is this person involved in is part of the conversation. And then a new data point we'll be tracking is vaccinated or unvaccinated. So we know we've already had 2 fully vaccinated staff this summer who have contracted COVID, so that's something that has us on high alert. And, honestly, one of the motivators for the universal masking. So I haven't seen quite yet what the final vote was today with the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, but I worry about putting benchmarks or metrics out there like the 80% vaccination rate, because we just don't know yet how this Delta variant or other variants are going to behave in our schools. But we do know that masking is a really important risk mitigator, probably second to vaccination, but Dr. Wolf could weigh in if he feels differently about that. So we're going to be looking at all of those data points and really looking at our test and stay and our routine COVID safety check data to see, one of the things we started tracking last year was when we learned of a positive case, does this person participate in our pooled testing program? Because that, I think, is also an important piece of information. So we'll be collecting all of those same data points as we go.
Thank you. That's all very helpful. I appreciate it. And finally, I just wanted to say something about, we have heard, as you know, a lot of concerns about lunch from family members and the community. And today, thank you for putting out more detailed guidance with the principals about each school and how that's going to be handled. I know that there's a lot of, I feel like I'm yelling, but I'm trying to project, sorry. I feel like I sound mean. I'm not trying, I'm just trying to project in the room. It's hard to hear everyone. I know that there have been suggestions around volunteers and folks that could help because staffing is such a challenge, as you've mentioned a couple of times. And just to say as a caveat, I completely understand the reasons why, especially this year, volunteers are such a challenge. You already have staffing challenges, and now you have to have someone managing volunteers and checking them in, and are they vaccinated, or do they need to, and all of that, in addition to the normal CORI and bridge processes that volunteers go through in the schools. So I'm completely sympathetic to all of that. I would say, just as one school committee member, that if we have funding available through the ESSER programs or in other way, and there is a creative thinking around like part-time volunteer coordinators who could be paid with a stipend to help take some of that burden off so that we could get more volunteers in the schools, even if it's 2 hours a day at the middle school or the elementary schools until some of these younger students can get vaccinated, even if it's helping with hand washing and transitions in the halls, whatever. I would really be interested in hearing about that. And I bet that there are parents in the district who would be interested in those kind of helping, and especially if there could be a stipend for some of that. So any creative thinking, I know you're already thinking about all of this. Every time I think of something, you've already thought of it, but anything we can do in that regard, I would really support and look forward to hearing back to the committee for a funding request, because I think, we really, especially around lunch and some of the transition in and out, I think having some more adults to help might be a good solution for us to think about.
Absolutely.
So, thank you. That's it. I just also want to say that I'm so supportive of this plan. I'm very, very strongly in favor, plan to vote yes. I'm so happy with the level of community response and engagement we've had around it, the folks who have written to us and commented. I've been thinking a lot about the connection between public school and public health, as we all have, I know, over the last few years, this last 18 months and longer. I think it's really easy for us to think of all this as a burden on our students and a burden on our families, and I'm not trying to minimize the challenges that this year brings, but I also think, to your point about reframing the way we think about things, I know I'm challenging myself and my family, and I really challenge all of us to think of this as really a way that we're all doing our part, including our kids, our youngest, our kindergartners coming in with their masks and their ready to learn and, ready to follow the rules. This is a real opportunity to think about how we all have a responsibility to keep each other healthy and learning and to really do our civic duty. And I think framing it that way as an opportunity to be positive civic actors in our community is really important. And I really challenge us all to think of this year that way so that we can all stay together and learning for the whole year in person. So thank you for the work that you're doing in that regard. It could not be more clear that you think that way and more important. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McAndrew. Ms. Rosie Thomas, please.
Thank you so much. Just in the creative problem-solving vein, thank you, Chair McAndrew, for your comments. I'm wondering about the lunch problem dilemmas and could we ask the crossing guards and the drivers to help during that time? Because that's not when they're busy with their job. like, could we pay them? Anyway, just wondering if you have any more updates for possible solutions to this dilemma that we have.
That's a great idea and certainly one that we can explore. I hadn't thought of that one, so.
All right, we know more than ever that we're all interconnected, so, and let's all keep working to keep COVID down in Melrose. That's all I want to say. Thank you for a really clear, comprehensive, easy-to-read plan.
Further discussion? Mr. Mayor, please.
I apologize because I wasn't here for part of this discussion. And Doctor, I want to thank you for being here as well. And Chair McAndrew's question about how do you decide what data you're looking at, I think merits a little bit more comment. And what data do you use? How do you frame it? To your point, we're not public health professionals. So what we do, and if anything I say is wrong, please correct me. So we look to folks like the CDC, who has suggested this policy. We look to the American Academy of Pediatrics. We look to the Mass Medical Society, to public health and clinical health leaders in Massachusetts, and really in some respects throughout the country, when they inform us about what they think the trends are and what best policy is. So it's fair to say we're not doing this in the abstract. We are leaning on all that data and all that expertise to inform our decision-making. Correct?
Absolutely, 100%.
And it's important for folks, we're not just doing this in a vacuum and going, oh, it ticked up a little bit, so you are going to say, all right, we will change the lunch policy X, Y, and Z way. It's much more nuanced and thoughtful than that. And I will say, from the vast majority of the email we got, it's reflected. The public seems to understand that, but I think it bears repeating that they are expecting kind of sophisticated and nuanced thought about how do we get there. And you have and your staff and the health department and others have done a terrific job making sure we're tapping into those kind of resources outside the district to make sure that we're doing it the right way. So thank you for that work.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any further discussion? Dr. Wolf, please.
Thank you. And I'll be brief, but I want to thank all of you for this enlightened discussion. The superintendent and her staff have put together a state-of-the-art, well-crafted, well-thought-out plan to try to keep our students, our teachers, our administrators safe. We know that the way for a conducive learning environment, you need to have a healthy staff and healthy students. And that goes for all aspects of their health, but it's extremely challenging this year, as it was last year, in this pandemic environment, to achieve that. What her plan does is mitigate risk. It doesn't eliminate it, it mitigates it. We all understand that none of these strategies are foolproof. But the combination of careful hand washing, disinfecting, good ventilation, mask wearing, testing frequently are the measures that we need to try to keep our students and teachers safe. The key, obviously, is to vaccinate. And those who are 12 and older should be vaccinated. And the FDA just approved the Pfizer vaccine, and will soon approve the Moderna vaccine as well. So all of these measures are necessary and important, and we have to be flexible. We have to change. This is a dynamic process, and you mentioned the CDC and outside forces that are working very hard to learn new things about the pandemic as it progresses, as we all are, and our actions have to be dictated by what we learn about what's going on. One thing I'll just mention, and it's a shout out to the nurses who work in Melrose, had a a very challenging year last year, but we learned a lot last year in terms of testing and responding to positive tests and contact tracing and all the things that we need to do individually for families to try to keep them safe and for the greater good to keep everybody else safe. So we learned a lot last year, and that informs us and puts us in actually a better place this year to respond to the challenges ahead. So I just want to thank all of you for having this discussion, and to the superintendent and her staff for putting together such a well thought out plan to get us through this academic year.
Very good. And while the doctor is in the house, any comments or questions from the committee? Seeing none, Doctor, thank you very much for your service to our community. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Any further and final, well, actually, I have a question. Well, let me ask the committee. Any further discussion from the committee?
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Everybody's content. Ms. McAndrew, please.
Just very quickly, since Dr. Wolf mentioned vaccination, I just wanted to point out that we are having a vaccination clinic for any Melrose Public Schools students, their families, anyone in Melrose on the 30th, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to highlight that as well.
Yes, thank you for that opportunity. It will be right on the secondary campus. You'll be able to, whether you need your first dose, your second dose, please come. We do have a significant number of our school-age students who are eligible for the vaccine who've gotten their first dose. The number drops off a little bit for the fully vaccinated. So that tells us that there's, several students, potentially hundreds that need their second dose. You can get it on the 30th from 2 to 7, right in Melrose, right on the secondary campus. And you can also get your first dose. So if you haven't yet gotten that, you can get that process started. And then we anticipate, now that we know a booster is recommended 8 months out, that we'll need to repeat that process again. But the mayor and I are committed to making it as accessible as possible. This is really the continuation from what the mayor stood up at the
Summer stroll.
summer stroll, thank you. So this is round 2 of that, but it can be round 1 or round 2. It doesn't really matter. If you need any vaccinations, you can come that day. It's open to everyone, not just students, not just staff. It can be anyone in Melrose or around Melrose, is my understanding. So thank you for that reminder.
Sorry to ask one more question.
Please.
I'm just wondering, you probably don't know it yet because you're just returning, but do you know the vaccination rates within your staff?
I don't have that number yet. We're setting up the system within Aspen, which is our student information system. It should be ready to launch on Friday, and we'll start collecting that information.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else from the committee at this time? Mr. Mayor, please.
Not to beat a dead horse, but excited that the Hvac bus is coming back to Melrose. We're really trying to make it easy for folks to get vaccinated. Folks should also understand, though, it is really easy to find the vaccine. You can go online, you can call 211. If for some reason the Hvac bus doesn't work for you, there's a million other ways to do it, and you should really look into it. It is the most important single mitigation strategy that is out there. The community is doing a terrific job, but the more folks get it, the better we do. And you should not, particularly now that, as the doctor mentioned, it is 100%, at least the Pfizer's 100% FDA vetted, so this is no longer an experimental measure. You really, really need to get the vaccine. Again, if for some reason you can't figure out how to get to it, certainly call my office or, again, the state's 211 line. They will get you there.
Very good. Anything else from the committee? So, a lot of emails about lunch, which you've addressed in the moment and tonight, and a lot of interest in opt-in versus opt-out. And I'm going to ask you to speak briefly about that. I also want to address something that came up in public comment in terms of the outreach, and Ms. McAndrew has eloquently stated how important the contact and the information and the engagement we receive from the community is. We are diligent to a person in reading and processing and reacting to everything that we get. And I know all of us, perhaps save for Ms. Razzie Thomas, felt horrible at hearing that someone didn't get a response from us. And so, you know, we apologize for that. It happens sometimes. We get an enormous volume of correspondence. So if one fell through the cracks, sorry about that. That said, opt in, opt out.
Yes, so I thank you for the opportunity to speak to that because I intended to. I am aware of one community that has an opt-out policy, and that is Somerville. And thank you to our families who alerted us to that. The mayor and myself and our colleagues have been are going to reach out to Somerville. We have made attempts to find out how is it that they're legally making that happen. I've also reached out to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to get clarification, because it's crystal clear in every webinar I've attended about the testing program. Even though we participated last year, and we have lots of families who gave consent last year, we have to re-consent this year, the same way we re-consent annually for acceptable use policy and photo permissions and things like that. So we are not doing it because we don't want to. We're trying to follow what we're being told is the process and the procedure that protects our students' and families' information, which is something that's really important, one of the many important jobs that we do. There are some districts who have chosen to make it mandatory for, say, student athletes or to participate in extracurriculars. Just from an equity standpoint, I don't agree with that as a strategy. You know, this is a family decision whether students are testing or not. Our students don't get to make that choice. They have to have their parents' consent. And so to then exclude a student from extracurriculars or school because that's not a choice for their family at this time, to me, doesn't align with our values here in Melrose. So that's why we're not implementing that type of a mandatory policy for extracurriculars or athletics, or why I'm not recommending it, I should say. So I will continue to explore this. We want to make it as easy as possible for families, and that's why we're focusing on the logistical side of it and getting it in Aspen so it's just a one-stop shop. It is one consent for all three forms of testing. You don't get to pick and choose. That was part of the confusion last year, was like you had to consent for each type of testing. So it should be much more streamlined, which should increase our numbers. And just being honest, the big motivator for families should be a couple of motivators. Number one, it's easy, it's painless. Kids can do it themselves. We've learned that preschoolers are just as good at collecting specimens on themselves as adults are. And so that's you know, something to think about. And also, this is how you keep your kids in school. If they become close contacts, which they may while they're at school, because we have more students back in the building, they can test and stay. And that in and of itself, for me as a parent, would be a motivator to want my child to be able to access that. So we'll make it fun. You saw last year Nurse Kathy at Roosevelt. She had her glittery cart, and we'll think of ways to make it really approachable for even our youngest students. But it's a really important part of our strategy.
Very good. Thanks for that. Any comments or questions in that particular regard? Any further final comments or questions generally? Seeing none, we have a motion to approve the district's comprehensive back-to-school plan before us. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Superintendent, and your team for the work. And that concludes educational programs and personnel this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. Next up is Finance and Facilities with Ms. Driscoll and Ms. Razzie Thomas. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much. First on the Finance and Facilities agenda this evening is the DPW School Safety Update, and I will turn it over to the Superintendent.
Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. I'd like to invite my colleague, Jay McNeil, our Facilities Manager, up to the podium. Last week, I mentioned that we had our safety summit with the public safety and DPW. Elena Proikasalis, who is our Director of DPW, or DPW Director, presented these slides. And we felt it was really important for the community to hear directly from our colleagues at DPW about all of the work that has gone on this summer. Your mind will be blown to know what they have accomplished in just 6 short weeks. It's also important for the community to know that this year we were utilizing 5 of our schools for summer programming, our extended school year programming, and also our summer learning academies. And so the DPW didn't have access to many of our buildings nearly for enough time to do all of the things that they have somehow magically accomplished. There's small projects, there's routine projects, and then there's some big capital projects that were accomplished. So I'm going to start by saying thank you to Jay and his team. I don't know how you guys have done it, but then I'll turn it over to you to kind of brag for a little bit and show off all of the good work that you guys and ladies have accomplished.
Thank you, Julie. Good evening, everyone. As Julie mentioned, Elena and I put together this presentation last week. Kind of summarizes the life safety work that we did over the summer, as well as some of the projects. So the HEPA air filter purifiers will be in all the classrooms and spaces that they were in last year. Leah and I have been working together to identify other spaces and add them where needed. Summer HVAC maintenance, including filter changes, has all been completed or is wrapping up within the next few days. And outside air and exhaust settings for all the air handlers and fresh air systems are going to be balanced to maximize fresh air, but to maintain indoor comfortable levels. All right, cleaning protocols. We'll be following the same protocols that we did last year. We stripped and waxed all the floors. One challenge we did face was all the tape and decals that we put down on the floors last year. A lot of that adhesive was difficult to get up, so unfortunately we weren't able to get it all up, but we'll continue to work at it over time as we do the floors. Carpet cleaning we completed, as well as, I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little bit to see this.
You want to sit here? This microphone will work. Yeah.
Real quick.
Jay, I think,
Yeah.
oh.
That's fine, that's fine. So painting, ceiling tiles, and all the custodians completed training as well for COVID protocols.
She's faster than me.
Thank you very much. All right, safety inspections and improvements. So AHERA compliance, we did asbestos abatement in the Franklin and Winthrop schools, and new VCT flooring was installed. Fire systems, including the fire alarm system, sprinkler systems, kitchen ventilation systems, were all inspected and maintained. The high school front stairs were replaced. It was deteriorating concrete, which was all removed, and new granite stairs were installed, and some of the railings were rusted out, so we repaired those and reinstalled them. Gym floors at the Lincoln and Winthrop schools were refinished. We performed roof repairs at multiple schools, including the Horace Mann, Hoover, Franklin, Lincoln, and Roosevelt. Painting and ceiling tile work where needed. Exterior door repairs were completed at the Lincoln and Hoover to improve security and reliability. LED lighting projects at 5 or 6 of the schools, including the high school and middle school gyms, several areas of the high school, the Horace Mann, and Winthrop and Lincoln schools. The Lincoln school is wrapping up this week, and that'll be all the schools. And then all the classroom moves and furniture moves to get the classroom set back up as they're needed.
As Jay is casually saying that as one bullet on these slides, that was an enormous project in and of itself. That was an enormous project in and of itself, just to clear out the multi-purpose rooms and get all that furniture back. Huge.
Thank you, Julie. Another project that we are completing right now is upgrading the domestic hot water system in the high school. The current system was past its expected life expectancy. Over a 2,000-gallon system, so it was a lot of energy wasted. So we replaced that to some new energy-efficient hot water tanks. The Winthrop boiler is slated to be replaced in the upcoming weeks. That was ordered over 2 months ago. Just lead times with COVID right now, it's taking a little longer to get in. Several dozen faucets and a few toilets were replaced across the buildings to improve plumbing. This includes the Horace Main and Hoover basements, the sewer mains. We replaced several feet of pipe there to increase flow and reduce backups. Window repairs and shade replacement also completed in several buildings. The Franklin School has a lot of curtains that are being removed, and we're installing shades in place of them. All right, school grounds, a lot of landscaping improvements, a lot of dead branches were removed, some dead trees were removed, fence improvements, vines and bushes growing into the buildings were cleaned up, and all the mulch beds were just remulched in the past week as well to spruce up the grounds for the return of students. Here we have two pictures of the left is the Winthrop APR room, and the right is the Lincoln gym. As you know, they were used for furniture storage for the past year, so the floors took a good beating. So those just all got refinished. The top two pictures here are one of the Hoover stairwells. We had a significant roof leak. On the left, you can see all the water damaged ceiling tiles. On the right, all the replaced ceiling tiles. That ceiling is over 20 feet high, so to be OSHA compliant, we did have to get scaffolding to put up the whole stairwell to get that done. And we repainted the stairwell while we had the scaffolding in place. The lower roof, sorry Leah, no problem. Lower roof is Horace Mann, another older roof that we're constantly making repairs at, just to kind of show the condition of the roof there. Here is some of the asbestos abatement work that we completed. This is all from the Franklin School here, just deteriorated floor tiles. The AHERA compliance, they cite all the areas that we need to address, everything we need to abate. So these were a few of the areas. The right picture is a hall in the basement of the Franklin, and the middle picture is actually an entry vestibule. Rather than putting tiles back there, we're doing a weather carpet, a weather scraper mat. It should help with the slip and fall coming into the buildings as well. And here are some of the plumbing improvements down in the crawl spaces, basements of the building, where we had some severe backups. Older pipe, a lot of scale buildup in the pipe, so we replaced it to increase flow and reduce backups. And yeah, staff are already back in the buildings. And a big thank you to all of our tradesmen, custodians, for everything they do. Really going the extra effort to get the schools ready. It was quite a trying summer. Just a great thank you to all of them. Any questions?
Very good. Thank you so much. Questions from the committee? Mr. Obremski.
I don't know if you can answer this. It doesn't pertain to what was on the slides, but do you have a time frame on the construction near the Horace Mann School, the road work? Do you know anything about the time
The
frame?
engineering department is leading that. I do not have all the information.
That's all right.
I do know that some notices went out yesterday to the abutters in the neighborhood, and they were saying it should not impact the pickup or drop off at Horace Mann. It's more of the outer streets in that area.
All right. Okay, thank you.
But the engineering department could provide more information.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Additional questions or comments? Ms. McAndrew?
Thank you so much, and thank you to your colleagues, all of them, and everyone, all your summer workers, and everyone who helped with this tremendous amount of work. I just note that the Horace Mann and Hoover roofs that you mentioned are two projects that we have put forward for MSBA accelerated improvement funding for roofs, and we hope that that will come through. And I had a question about the HVAC updates that you gave, and this is just mine not knowing, but can you talk about how you sort of, I remember from last year that you mentioned that every school is sort of different in terms of its heating system and the air intake. Some have individual classrooms that vent right to the outside, and, you know, so that is just airflow within that classroom. Others are differently functional. And I'm just wondering how, if at all, do you test the airflow and the air quality in the school buildings? And you know, when do you do that, and how do you do that, and what is anything in that regard different during COVID?
So, great questions, thank you. Some of the more modern buildings, middle school, Lincoln, Roosevelt, and some of the high school, we have online HVAC software where we can see what's going on. It's not actually testing the air, but we can monitor the air exchanges, how much CFM is being exhausted, cubic feet per minute, and fresh air coming in. Regarding the actual air quality, we did do the testing last fall for the school reopening. That was kind of a one-time thing, but we do monitor the online software for air exchanges.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Comments? Seeing none, just want to echo our appreciation to you, Mr. McNeil, and your great staff for all your hard work. And also just to note, relative to Ms. McAndrews' comment with the MSBA and the roofs, that the MSBA will be visiting with Mr. McNeil and City Planner Denise Gaffey this Thursday to do those inspections. So the process is continuing on schedule, and we are keeping our fingers crossed and hoping that our funding can come through.
Yes, we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda this evening is offsets for FY21. And I will invite, through the superintendent, Ms. Secor, to speak with us about those offsets.
I believe Leah has some slides prepared to reinforce her presentations tonight. Need some help?
Technical difficulties.
Good evening. As you can see in your packet, I put out, sorry that the technical difficulties, but as you can see in your packet, we have a listing of everything in the offsets that was proposed and approved by the school committee for FY21. I come to you this evening because we need to make adjustments in the revenue offsets this evening. Hold on. So as of January 2021, the district froze the operational accounts for the COVID school year. We had a savings this year of over $597,000, which I would show you in a minute. We offset the athletic revolving accounts, the facilities rental accounts, and we offset the ECC revenue offset as well as MECO. In your packet, you'll see that you had an amount budgeted with $3.993 million. There was a revenue adjustment of $3.317, And as of later today, as about 2:30, we found that there was another adjustment to be made. I worked along with the city auditor's office. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Awesome. So I worked with the city auditor's office, and what we were trying to do is make this as clear and simple as possible. So FY21 total expenditures was $37 million. The city's appropriation was $32,985,441. So what I did on this slide is I took the 37 and I took the 32 off, minus the Special Education Stabilization Fund, and then minus the carry forward FY20 purchase orders, which brings us to an offset balance of $3,421,029. And that is the delta to bring us to flush with the city this year. If you go to the next slide, you'll notice that the packet was distributed on 8/19, and that on the left-hand side is what I first proposed, and on the right-hand side is what the final proposal is. The difference between the two columns you'll see is $104,000, and the difference is between the MECCO account. We had transportation overages as well as some summer expenditures that needed to be taken out of that grant. So once this is approved this evening as proposed, we will be closing out the books for FY21.
Very good. So in the interest of our agenda and for the purposes of discussion, I would entertain a motion to reduce the amount of offset in the budget from $3,993,407 to $3,421,029. Made by Mr. O'Connell, seconded by Mayor Broder. Are there any questions or is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that motion carries unanimously, Ms. Hogan. Next on our agenda is the food service van proposal, and again through the superintendent, if I may ask Ms. Secor to speak with us about that.
So the food service department has an aging van. We do only have one vehicle for the food services. We do deliver from the high school to all elementary schools, the warm lunches. And it is a 2006 Ford Econoline with approximately 76,000 miles, which doesn't seem like a lot of miles, but it's all in-town miles. It's going from each elementary school. So as you can see, over the past 3 years, we've spent money on significant repairs, and we still have a lot of significant repairs to do. It does not meet the emissions standard this year to pass inspection. And we currently need to support, just the delivery of all these meals to all these kids. And this will benefit the district as well as the students all year round, since it's free food for lunch and breakfast.
Very good. So for purposes of discussion, I would entertain a motion for approval. Ms. McAndrew, seconded by Mr. Obremski. Are there any questions on this motion? Ms. McAndrew.
Not a question, just a comment. Thank you. I'm glad we're making this investment. And I just wanted to thank, through the superintendent and Ms. Secor, all of the food services workers, and Ken Dolce, our director of food, for, just as you mentioned, the tremendous increase in volume of lunches and breakfasts, and glad that every student has the opportunity for a free breakfast and lunch this year. And I completely agree that it's time to invest in a new van, particularly given the balance we're carrying in the food services account. So thank you.
Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Ms. Secor. A point and a comment or a question. It's important to note that we've got a current balance in food services of over $500,000, and we're using some $38,000 to make this investment. My second comment or question, clearly we're doing this through the state's Operational Services Division, as is custom and certainly appropriate. We've talked before here and in other venues about more environmentally friendly vehicles. And I know we're buying, not to put too fine a point on it, but we're buying a Ford Transit, and my understanding that Ford is coming out with an electric Transit before the end of the year for the 2022 model year. Is that, and again, we buy these through Operational Services. I'm assuming that Operational Services will include in the fleet going forward electric Ford Transit vans. Is that your expectation as well? And is that on our radar in terms of where we go with our vehicle purchases going forward?
Yeah, so on the food services van, we do go through the Operational Services Division, as well as get approval from DESI to make such a large purchase through the food service revolving account. We are always looking for environmentally friendly, means of transportation. We were on a call with the mayor's office for the electric vehicles as well. I think it was a week or two ago. And we're always looking for other ways of doing just environmentally friendly things. Right now, unfortunately, there's a very high demand for all these kind of vehicles, electric vehicles as well as regular gas vehicles. And we're just trying to, get as right now they don't have a Ford Econoline right now, but we are always looking at that opportunity.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mayor Broder.
Just want to plug that work a little bit more. So, you all know we have Martha Grover, our sustainability manager, who does a lot of work in energy conservation, environmental preparedness, vulnerability, and resiliency. We have actually started a process with National Grid. National Grid actually supports fleet electrification. We're really at the beginning of the process, but I think the goal would be to establish a citywide policy essentially of electric first, meaning you evaluate, we do an economic analysis, but a broader one that includes maintenance and lifetime of cost to figure out what where the value is and where the grants might be. We're really just getting started with that, but that is where we want to head in terms of things like fleet procurement.
Very good. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Did I do that already? All right, we're good. Next on our agenda is the early bird proposal. Ms. Secor.
So as you can see, as outlined, is the education stations fee schedule for the afternoon. And what we're going to do is reinstate the early bird program. Education Stations is now going to run that program for the schools. It's an hour in the morning before school starts. And we've mirrored the same fee for the afternoon as the morning at $8 per hour.
Very good. So given that, I would entertain a motion for the proposal of $8 per morning per child. Mr. O'Connell has made that motion. That has been seconded by Ms. DeSalm. Are there comments or questions on the motion, Ms. McAndrew?
Very quick question, thank you. I'm fully supportive of the early bird, and I think the fee is appropriate. Does this apply to the Franklin, or because it says elementary, is this just?
It does. Yeah.
It does, so there'll be early bird at the Franklin. Is that just for the kindergarten students, or anyone could use that?
For all.
Okay, great, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Other comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that motion carries unanimously. Next on our agenda is the audit update.
So in your packet, you can see the the FY20 end-of-year audit report. Powers and Sullivan performed the annual audit of the end-of-year report as they do every year. This year was extremely different in the time frame in which they came and audited. The department, DESE has actually, normal deadlines were not met. DESE actually asked the auditing firms to get all the paperwork to them by June 30th this year. Our normal audit timing is in March, and this year they came out in May. As you can see is their schedule of findings right now. And if you look at each finding starting on page 2, you'll see that in detail they will generally explain what the finding was, and they will give comments as to, well, an amendment has been filed with DESE to correct this finding. Because this audit was performed so late in the year, unfortunately, I performed all the audits as I could on the 28th when it was given to me, and I performed the rest of them as in detail explicitly in July. So all the audit findings were basically taken into consideration, brought to the portal, and amended. There's no difference in, it was just basic, you know, as you can see, the requirement number 2, the amendment has been filed in 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you'll see in other methodology, you know, like finding 8 doesn't have that specific verbiage there, but it has been done. Everything has been basically communicated to me from DESE that everything has been posted and everything has been asserted and all set.
Very good. Are there any questions for Ms. Secor? Mr. O'Connell?
I would just note, this is pretty standard stuff, particularly given the circumstances that we had last year. And, you know, I know you're required to bring this forward, but thank you for doing that. And most importantly, thank you for addressing all of these to our satisfaction. Much appreciated. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. DeSelm?
Thank you. I too want to reiterate that this is pretty standard. Every year we get an audit report that shows some minor discrepancies between the city side financial and the school committee side, or public school side. And so thank you for your work. I know it's difficult this year. The word unprecedented has been used enough times that it's no longer really unprecedented. And we look forward to next year being smoother, maybe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional comments? Seeing none, I echo the comments of my colleagues. This is a very difficult time, and with the timing in particular, it was very stressful, I'm sure. So we're grateful to your team for addressing everything quickly and appropriately.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda, Ms. Secor and the superintendent have prepared a grants update for us. As you know, under our oversight responsibilities, grants is one of those areas. We've had many discussions about grants relative to federal grants, and she's going to walk us through a little bit more about how grants work and what they provide our district.
Thank you. So as you can see, we have various categories for the grants that we acquire. You'll note that in the specifics of the grants itself, you'll find that there are some entitlement grants as well as there are competitive grants that are basically the state grants that reside. Excuse me. Yep. So as you can see in the first slide, those are the IDEA clusters, the special education grants. So the first 2 grants, as you note, will be the first 2 entitlement grants, and those 2 are the, I would say, the norm for us every year. And the last two are the ARP grants, which are the American Rescue Plan grants. Those two grants on the bottom were given to us by the federal government, and they're good for, well, not good, but they run from this September to next September, and there's only one allocation. So that is the monies that we will receive for those, for opening this school year and next year as well. As you can see, these are ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. These are the two COVID relief funds that we've acquired from the federal government. The first one, as you can see, ESSER 2, if you'd probably remember that number, that's how we balanced the budget. Not balanced the budget, but we incorporated it in our budget conversations, how we would utilize that grant last year. And we will be strategically using ESSER 3 in interventionists this year. The ESSER 2 grant is basically all accounted for, and ESSER 3, we've only talked about $120,000 worth. So as a So as a district, I know that everybody will be talking about ESSER 3 come soon enough. Thank you. So these are the ESSA grants, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and these are the what I call the title grants. Title I, Title IIA, Title III, and Title IV. These are another set of entitlement grants that we do receive, and they're for various reasons. Title I is for the general use of the district. Title IIA is for professional development. Title III is for PD as well as some supplies. And Title IV is for language acquisition, professional development as well. And then here is the FY22 state grants, which these are the state programs that are competitive. These are not entitlement grants. Thanks to Margaret Adams and Amy Jackson, we've received MECO every year, but every year we have to apply. We have to compete with other districts. And then the, excuse me, the next 5 grants, Margaret Adams procured, as well as she applied, she got chosen, Melrose was chosen to receive such monies. She did an amazing job getting all these grants over the summer. The Proficiency Outcome Grant was a dual grant where Margaret Adams as well as the World Languages Department applied for. And we look forward to doing the assessments as outlined in that grant. And so as I conclude, I just want to make sure that you understand we're always constantly looking for more grant opportunities, looking to make sure that we're always making sure that there's, you know, enough information, enough data driven, and applying for everything that we can.
Excellent. Questions or comments from the committee? Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Ms. Secor. My impression is that grant writing is an all-hands-on-deck thing here in Melrose. But I'm assuming someone, and maybe it's you, is in charge of it overall. Or maybe it's Ms. White-Lambright, I don't know. Can you speak to that a little bit? Is this your ball of wax ultimately?
So it's not really my ball of wax, it's really a team effort. Margaret and Patty and I really do put a lot of work into this. The entitlement grants are very specific on criteria and budget items, but when it comes to those competitive grants or those other items that we need to be creative about, Patty and Margaret really succeed in those areas.
Very good. Well, 2 things I've noticed. The reporting has gotten better and better all the time, certainly during my tenure here, and the number of grants we've received, competitive and otherwise, most importantly competitive, has increased. So thank you very much for the work. Very impressive and obviously much needed. So thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Additional comments or questions? Seeing none, I just had a couple of quick things. One, to some extent to Mr. O'Connell's comment about the monitoring and reporting. I think we always, from the outside, look in and are astounded by the amount of time that it takes to evaluate each element of a grant, to apportion it, to make sure it's on the correct line, because those grants are all audited. So it's really important that the district be very clear and transparent with the auditing powers that be around those grants, so that we continue to have opportunities to apply. And I just want to commend everybody for that work that is not the actual enjoyment of the teaching and learning and professional development that happens, but it's the housekeeping that happens behind closed doors that, without that being of excellent quality, could not result in improved outcomes for students. So that's one element. The second is that I continue to be impressed, particularly with the competitive grants, but also the deployment of the entitlement grant money, and how those align with our mission and our strategic overview, our professional development plans. So I think as a committee and a community, we should be very proud and appreciative to the staff members that there is a consistent through line between what the committee has indicated in our oversight role, that our foundational values continue to be respected and aligned with, and that comes through down to how a grant form is filled out. So that is very consistent in this district, and I think it's a hallmark of what you do.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. Close. Student activity accounts. As you know, when we vote our data presentations in December, we request quarterly reviews of student activity accounts. So I will again invite Ms. Secord to speak to that, please.
So the student activity accounts have been, with COVID, there hasn't been those large Italian, what's the word? Not vacations, but.
Yeah, like the exchange programs.
The exchange programs,
Yeah.
excuse me, thank you. There hasn't been a lot of those exchange programs. There hasn't been a lot of
Field trips.
field trips or togetherness, so to say. So there really hasn't been a lot of activity to report out. So this evening, I really just wanted to basically come to the table and just let you know that me and Dr. Denise Daglio, as well as Steve Fogarty, have been working together on a manual for student activities. We want to be able to, give an advisor some direction, some guidance, and have them be able to, read it, bring questions to the table, and run with what they need to do as their job so that I can do my job. The student activity funds are also scheduled for an audit by an outside agency a year from September, in September of 2022. I just wanted to remind the committee, as DESE requires, we audit every year, but every 3 years we do also have to have an outside agency do that for us. Every year they exceed expectations. They do everything for those kids that they need to do. The prom was a huge success this year. We had it outside, we had a tent, every kid had, everything they needed. It all flows through student activities, and everybody, as much as COVID took away a lot of things, they were able to have some good times. And that's what the function of this fund is for the kids. I want to thank my team. Without, the internal audits every year, me and my team, we wouldn't have such a great handle on things. I've really come to really rely on them. And any questions?
Any questions on student activity accounts? Seeing none, I'll just note that I think it's very positive that this committee oversees through the warrant process all of the expenditures that come out of student activity accounts, which is a best practice. There are many districts who make other selections in how their approvals are done, but the expenditures out of the Melrose student activity accounts sit with the school committee by virtue of them being on the warrants, which provides an additional layer of transparency to the community about those expenditures. So thank you very much for that. Consideration for using MVMMS as a municipal election site, and I will ask the superintendent to speak to that, please.
Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. We were approached by our colleagues at City Hall about utilizing the middle school gym again this election cycle, as we did last year, I believe. And so the request is for your approval to allow the middle school gym to be used as a municipal election site once again.
Very good. Are there comments or questions related to that, Mr. O'Connell?
I would just note, Madam Chair, that I'm glad we're voting on this. As this body knows, it's the school committee pursuant to the city charter and Massachusetts law that has general charge and superintendents over the school buildings and grounds, which means it's up to us to decide how the school buildings are used. And I certainly support this, but I'm glad we're voting on it as a matter of procedure. Thank you.
Very good. Ms. McAndrew?
Thank you. Yes, I also support this. I just want to note that this has been recommended by the Board of Registrars of Voters and approved by the City Council. We just heard from Mr. McNeil about the wear and tear on our facilities. And one of the things that this proposal does is that it consolidates the impact of elections and the voting process into one location rather than all of our school buildings. So that's one benefit. I also just think, given where we are with COVID and not knowing sort of, change and uncertainty is the name of the game this year. So if we do get additional mandates or recommendations from the state about conducting elections, distancing, all of that, I assume it would be helpful to be in one location to do that. So I support this, and thank you as well for bringing it before the committee.
Ms. Rosie
I
Thomas?
just have a question. If we're running for re-election, is it a conflict of interest to vote for this?
We got a lawyer here.
I wouldn't,
The short answer is no.
Ms. Lindquist, would you like to come to the table? It's not to put you on the spot, but I
Completely
will.
unprepared for the question.
Yeah, this is not a test.
My question is, if we are, if we are in the process of asking the voters to elect us, to re-elect us, is it a conflict of interest to vote on where they vote?
I would say it's not a conflict of interest, given that you're just voting on the facility to be used, and it has no sway over the actual voting that day. It's just the facility. You're just granting a right to use it for voting.
Thank you.
Very good. Ms. DeSalm?
Thank you. I note, just for purposes of information, that November 3rd, that's 2020, that's not the right calendar.
November 3rd.
Let me look at my phone for that.
I see it as a professional development day, but I'm afraid that's not the right calendar. It is in fact. Okay,
yeah.
good.
Students are not in attendance.
So by virtue, then, there will not be any students in the building, and therefore, we can have the public coming in and accessing this building without any concern for the families or their loved ones attending the school that day.
Mayor Broder?
To put a finer point on the possible conflict, keep in mind the city council voted this, and they are also on the ballot, and they actually have ward impacts, whereas school committee members do not. So it's not a problem at all. As a matter of fact, it was addressed specifically at that time for them, and we're fine doing that.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? May I have a motion? Motion to approve by
Motion
Ms.
to approve.
DeSilva and seconded by Ms. Rosie Thomas. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Lindquist. And finally, we had one item removed from the consent agenda, which is warrant S22005 in the amount of $490,370.13. Is there a motion for approval? Made by Mr. O'Connell, seconded by Mr. Obremski. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And I abstain. And I would like to thank Ms. Secor, as I did not do that previously, for her presentations this evening. And that concludes Finance and Facilities.
Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. Next up is Policy and Planning with Mr. Selman, Mr. Rosie Thomas. Thank you.
Good evening. Policy and Planning this evening has two agenda items. The first up is Policy EBCFA, face coverings. Of note, and by way of introduction, this is a continuation of a policy that was already voted on and approved 1 year ago. This is an update to reflect new language that came out of MASC and also reflects current policy that was issued by DESE today. At this time, this is for information only, and so I would welcome any discussion, comments, or questions. I do note our city solicitor is here and able to answer any questions from the legal side as needed. Making my life easy. No questions, no comments. Excellent. Next, we also have policies for first vote. The vote, there is a vote required. We may do this en masse as a slate, or we will pull these out. I believe these were up previously. I've been, Ms. Driscoll, I believe there was one you wished to pull out and make comment on?
Yes, and that had to do, and I did not mark the policy down, unfortunately, but it had to do with redaction of executive session minutes, and I believe, actually, I think it was policy BEC.
Policy BEC.
Yes, executive sessions. So thank you. It has to do with the redaction of minutes and the declassification of minutes. So it's those last paragraphs in that section, and I would recommend that language be included that would, with all due respect to the chair, try to take some pressure off of her as not a, or him, or whoever it may be at the time, relative to the responsibility and the review of those minutes, and assign that responsibility to legal counsel. At the time that this policy was prepared, we did not have legal counsel that was employed by the district. We were paying an hourly rate to an outside attorney. So that's the reason for a lot of the pre-work by the committee chair and the superintendent, whereas now we have in-house legal counsel. And I would recommend that the individual in this case, Ms. Lindquist, be assigned to do that work on behalf of the committee, and again, remove a volunteer from doing things that are best left in the hands of a legal expert.
So what I am hearing, and please correct me if I am wrong, is that pulling BEC from a vote tonight for further review and language modification is in fact in order.
I would appreciate that. And I would also, through the chair, to Ms. McAndrew, ask if that, does that align with any thoughts you have, or do you have any concerns around that? Because I certainly want to respect the role of the chairman and don't want to diminish or take away, but I just wanted to, try to put responsibility on a staff member as opposed to a volunteer.
No, I appreciate that, and I think that makes sense. I do think right now the policy assigns it to the chair and the superintendent, and to, consult with legal counsel, so I would probably suggest that we, I agree taking it off of the vote tonight, but maybe further discussion with Ms. Lindquist about whether we would keep the superintendent on as a reviewer as well, might be warranted, so.
So, should it be the pleasure of the chair, perhaps Ms. McAndrew and I could consult with the superintendent and Ms. Lindquist and bring back language that would be helpful and appropriate relative to the roles and what should be done in order to be as transparent with the community as possible.
Excellent. That is quite appreciated. And of course, just respectful of open meeting law, I would ask that you send that directly to me and not include my vice chair on this, such that we make sure we stay compliant.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. O'Connell, please.
Madam Chair, I would make a motion to approve the balance of these policies that are on for first vote.
We have a motion to approve the balance of the policies, vote required. We have a second made by Ms. Razzie Thomas. Any further questions, comments, or discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously, and that concludes policy. Oh. We recognize the mayor, yes?
So with the face covering policy that is essentially going into effect before our next meeting as a mask mandate, do we need to have this in place when school starts?
I believe the answer is no, but I would invite our city solicitor in. And the reason I believe the answer is no, just to foreshadow, is we already have a policy in place. This is just a continuation and update of said existing policy.
So I would recommend in your rules of procedure, you are allowed to vote all in one night. So I would recommend, just so that the updated policy is in place for the first day of school, that you consider doing that tonight. In particular, the changes that I would point out to you that are important for the first day of school is that the policy that was voted in last year required on school grounds, and that's no longer required by DESE or by our own policy. In addition, the superintendent's plan that you voted tonight allows vaccinated individuals, when they're working alone in an office, classroom, or space, not to have a mask on, and that is not allowed under the current policy as in place now. And in addition, this adds some language about what's going to happen if a student does not or refuses to wear a mask, that I think will be important guidance for both staff and students moving forward. So I think I would recommend that the committee vote that tonight. So that's in place on the first day of school.
Ms. McAndrew.
And thank you. And just through the chair to Ms. Lindquist, just a point of clarification. Do we first need to vote to invoke the emergency approval of the 3 votes in one night policy?
Correct. So it's 2 votes in one night, and you need a majority vote in order to allow yourselves to vote to the policy
So then
tonight.
I would first make a motion to allow us to do an emergency adoption in one night of a policy.
Motion to adopt on an emergency basis. Please send, one more time, say your
Sure. So
language.
it's a motion to invoke the emergency policy authorization. So first, we just have to invoke that we're going to use the policy to, on an emergency basis, approve any policy.
Sure.
We first have to vote to do that. So that would be my motion.
And just for Ms. Hogan, if you would send something to that effect to Ms. Hogan, or Diane, do you have that
I
down?
might be okay.
You're
if I
okay?
listen to the
Excellent.
recording.
So motion made by Ms. McAndrew, seconded by Mayor Broder. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Ms. McAndrew, would you like to, I invite you to make the second
The second motion
motion.
would be to approve by a first and second vote tonight the updates to policy EBCFA face coverings.
Motion to adopt, made by Ms. McAndrews, seconded again by Mayor Broder. We are ready for questions, yes.
Good. I'm just looking at what's submitted here in the packet, and there are some things still that are not yet edited in this one that don't align with the current plan. For example, when you look where it says additionally face masks or face coverings will not be required when appropriate social distancing is enforced, that's actually not language that we should strike through the even when social distancing is enforced in that section, because that's not part of our current plan. And also during physical education classes, if they're indoor, they are required, as we're requiring them for all indoor athletic events and spectators as well. So I just want to make sure we're all aligned closely with those things.
Ms. Driscoll, please.
So I would make a motion to amend based on the two items proposed by the superintendent.
Second.
Motion to amend made by Ms. Driscoll, second by Mr. O'Connell. Can you make sure I see that before we leave tonight so I can and make sure we get those to Ms. Hogan such that it's reflected? Do we need to vote on the amendment at this time?
Can I say one quick thing?
Ms. Razzie Thomas, please.
I think it's just really important to mention that we're changing the policy from what was recommended to, we're going to use the usual code of conduct and levels of discipline within each student handbook within the school that the student is in. If we have an issue with a student coming in and not wearing masks, we're going to follow our usual procedures to treat every student fairly.
Any further comments? Mr. O'Connell?
Through the chair, Ms. Lindquist, are you content with this amendment and with what Ms. Razzie Thomas just said about the handbooks?
Yes, that is the intent, yep.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further comment? Seeing none. Voting on the amendment. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. And thus we're back to the original motion to approve on an emergency basis, voting twice for said policy with the amendments now. And that motion, remind me, I believe was made by Ms. McAndrew and seconded by Mayor Broder. Any further comments on this? Seeing none. All in favor? Motion again passes unanimously. And I think without further ado, we are complete with policy and planning for the evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sohm.
And if I may, Madam Chair, thanks to Ms. Lindquist for staying so late, and Ms. Secor for that matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Okay, we have a few items on announcements of the chair tonight. First is an item from the consent agenda, which is the minutes from July 27, 2021. For purposes of discussion, is there a motion to approve the minutes? Made by Mr. O'Connell, seconded by Ms. Razzie Thomas. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstain? And that motion carries with 6 in favor and 1 abstention. Thank you all. Next, we have the approval of the site council election process. There is detailed information in the packet, and the public could also review about the site councils at each school. And I would just note that there are election processes for members of the public, educators, and others to be members of the school site councils. These are very important statutory councils that each school in Massachusetts has, and very important volunteer opportunity for folks. So definitely would encourage folks in the community to look at the openings that we have on our different school site councils this year and consider whether you want to participate in that process. We do need to vote on the election processes themselves. And for purposes of discussion, is there a motion made by Mr. O'Connell, seconded by Ms. Driscoll to approve the site council election processes? Any questions or comments? Mr. O'Connell.
I will say what I say every year, that I continue to think this is one of the most underutilized resources that we have, both as a district and as a school committee. And I would encourage everybody, including folks who are considering serving on these site councils, to look at the enabling statutes and to look at the authority and the responsibilities that these councils have. They're fairly expansive and hugely important to how we run our schools and do our business here, in fact. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you. Next, we have a vote on approval of a date change. So you'll recall that several months ago, we discussed when we had the rolling agenda last on our agenda, moving our annual special meeting in the fall, our retreat and training, from September 11th to September 25th, which we reflected on the rolling agenda, but did not vote as a date change. And since as a committee we vote on all of the school committee dates, I thought it would be best if we vote the meeting date change. So this is just to vote the change to September 25th, 2021. With that said, is there a motion to approve? Made by Mayor Broder, seconded by Mr. Obremski. Any questions or comments on that? Seeing none, all in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you. And lastly, we have our committee delegate and alternate to the MASC convention. And you'll recall that we did postpone this at our last meeting in Ms. DeSalm's absence, because we wanted to make sure she had every opportunity to participate as our delegate if she wished.
Lots of time to think about it.
Lots of time. Are there any nominations or self-nominations to be a delegate or alternate to the MASC?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do you have to be a member of the committee to be nominated and selected?
Yes. Is that a volunteer?
Nice try, Mr. Mayor.
It's lovely in November.
Mr.
Madam Chair,
O'Connell, yes.
I would nominate our colleague Elizabeth DeSalm to serve as our committee delegate.
I second that.
Okay, nomination made by Mr. O'Connell, seconded by, is it nomination accepted? It is, okay. And is there anyone who would like to serve as our alternate?
I'll be an alternate.
Ms. Razzie Thomas? That's a shaky raised hand. Thank you. So we,
Second.
seconded by Ms. DeSalm. So I would, let's do one motion to designate our policy team, Ms. DeSalm and Ms. Razzie Thomas, as our delegate and alternate to the MASC convention.
So I would make that motion.
Made by Mr. O'Connell, seconded by Ms. Driscoll. Any comments, questions, advice? Ms. DeSalm?
Thank you all for the trust that you place in me for this. And an invitation that every year that MASC has this event, there are topics for vote. And if you have any guidance, opinions, comments, or anything I should be aware of going in, as I'm not voting for myself, I'm voting on behalf of Melrose Public Schools and this body, I would be willing and open to listening to all views on these topics. So please don't be shy, please come talk to me.
And in terms of advice, Madam Chair, I would just advise our delegate and alternate to stay low and keep moving.
Thank you, helpful, I'm sure. So we have a motion on the table, all in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you both. I know many of us, several of us around here have done that in the past, as have you previously, Mr. Selman. It's very insightful, and also a way to hear about what's on the minds of some of our committee members around this state. So thank you all. That concludes our regular business. Is there a motion to adjourn? Made by Mayor Broder, seconded by Ms. Driscoll. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. And good luck on the first day of school.